digital transformation is a label that covers all sorts of ills. And your experience may be different. I'm interested to hear about that difference, but also hear about some of the challenges, whatever that difference, whether it's letting go of control, that presents to us as security professionals.
Agility is extremely important to us. If we can't innovate, if we can't create new solutions, we will quickly die as an organization. And so when I measure risk, I look at confidentiality, integrity, availability. We also look at agility as well, our ability to speed the business, because that's a major risk for us. So I think when you're building a security program out, that's incredibly important. The other area is when you're starting to look at things like the cloud or losing control of some of your systems, or the management of systems. There's different variables that you have to consider. And from my perspective, computers are great because there's so many different ways to do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. I can ask you to go, minimize a window, and there's probably 3 different ways to do something like that. And with any architecture or technology, there's really multiple ways. And so the cloud or devices that we're not managing, BYOB or D, that would be much more fun, but BYOD, there's just a different way to approach it to achieve the same outcomes. So we see a lot of organizations now trying to find ways to better control how a user accesses applications, not how they're securing the end device like a mobile phone, for example. Mm-hmm. The same thing with cloud. People look at it as an extension now of their network. They're able to segment it appropriately. They're able to manage assets in it. They're able to manage security configurations simply by taking a different perspective, maybe using different tool sets. And so I think it's just a change, a shift, that agility to adapt to some of the changes that we've talked about before. That's really the major shift in strategy as we go to these new types of devices. But at the end of the day, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face in the industry today. Going from a legacy environment that was well controlled, segmented, slow, to sort of this next gen solution that's rapidly changing. And everyone knows that one of the biggest enemies to security is rapid change, right?
Yeah.
So,
Paul, I mean, the rail network, I mean, I know you've been digitizing your signaling systems over the last some years. Would you ever contemplate putting some of the signaling processing up into the cloud, or indeed are you already?
Well, I would never say never. I think the key thing, just building on that, technology is going to change and adapt at a speed that we haven't prophesized in the last 10 years. If I look back 10 years and the idea of taking your data, moving it off premise and giving that flexibility to the end user is completely alien to us. I think it's important that as security communities, we support our business in making informed decisions about how to manage and treat risk. And as part of that, it also involves letting go a little bit and supporting them in their decision-making processes when they choose to adopt new technologies and new services. It's impossible in my world to have eyes on everything that my organisation does. There's 38,000 people, there's thousands of properties, there's data flowing everywhere. I die trying. Actually, what underpins it is building a better culture of security within my organisation. And it comes back to the point we've touched upon, is security was always a very regulated box that you put everything in, and you'd never move outside of that, and you'd burn in flames if you did. That's moved now. The infrastructure is amorphous. We have data in the cloud, we have data on-prem. A lot of our workforce is moving to mobility. Our teams of engineers who are working out on the railway in the middle of the night need access to that data very, very quickly to make informed decisions. They're also being compelled to innovate and try new things and be creative, and technology is a part of that. It's very important, and we work very, very hard for the organisation to recognise that it's not for us to say no, it's for us to help support them make a balance between risk and reward. But more importantly, it's important for the business to recognise that security is a collective responsibility, and it's incumbent upon everybody within the organisation. if you go back 10 years, it was IT's problem to secure, and we worked within a rigor of rules and protocols to enable us to do that. If the organisation wants to be fluid and innovate and be creative and not have those constraints placed upon them, they have to carry some of that burden of responsibility. And we're working very hard to drive that security culture up and through the railway as an industry, not just within Network Rail, to recognise the importance of that collective responsibility, so that they understand the asset. Is it my asset? Is it somebody else's asset? What am I trying to do with it? What are the outcomes? What's the risk I'm prepared to tolerate? So what are the controls that I need to put in place to make this work? Now, looking at that in the context of new technology, can I make it work today? Could I make it work tomorrow? But these are all the conversations that we have, and my team now spends more of its time, rather than worrying about compliance and assurance, which is still there, we're a regulated business, but it's actually about those early conversations about the art of the possible and supporting the business when they're trying to innovate.
So Brian, digital media business, you must be at the forefront of these sorts of changes. So what's your take? I mean, how do you secure the digital transformation?
I'm not sure that we're necessarily at the front. We're certainly up there. We're always trying the new technologies, and that's interesting to have the business coming forward with new ideas and finding ways in which we can work with the data that we collect from our viewers to enhance it's ultimately their experience, so that they're watching the right type of advert, the right type of adverts being applied during the right type of program and that kind of thing. And so we have to give that freedom, and one of the things that I've had to come to terms with is to increase the amount of trust that we put within our business analysts and our data analyst teams. And so we've got that data, and that data's up in the cloud, and previously maybe your security measures were quite restrictive, so you'd say, no, you can't have those permissions, that has to go through a change control process, and we'll be able to do that for you in a week's time. Well, they're expecting things to be happening immediately. I think one of the things that really helps is the fact that because the way in which technology has moved to the point now that we have smartphones, you've got social media, you've got so many more people that are actually interacting on the internet on a daily basis, that they're beginning to understand security as well and why it's important. And you've got the companies like Facebook, like Instagram, Amazon, Gmail, all of the providers, and they're introducing two-factor authentication. That's there. It's free, so security. We always used to have the conversation from people saying, why should I have antivirus software on my PC at home because it costs money? And we'd say, well, actually, there's perfectly adequate free antivirus software, and then they start to listen. They didn't seem to feel as though security was something that they wanted to invest in, but if it was for free, then why not go for it? But just by introducing two-factor authentication on those systems opens up that conversation. They then start to understand why you've got it on your VPN at work and why they have to go through those hoops to be able to get into it. And I think they start to understand the importance of that data, particularly with the number of breaches that we've seen happening over the years, which is just ever increasing and getting to crazy numbers of like hundreds of millions of email addresses being leaked out there. And they read that in the paper, and then suddenly a week later they're getting an awful lot of phishing and spam email, and they're able to relate the two. So they understand the importance now of keeping that data protected. And that just helps us within our conversations, because we're not starting from scratch. They're already up there, and we're getting to a generation of people there where they're quite savvy with technology, whereas I can remember a point when there weren't computers. My God, that makes me sound old. But I remember my dad coming home from work with what he would call a laptop, was the size of this desk with a tiny keyboard and a monitor that big. Whereas now, you've got the smartphones and Apple Watches and all stuff like that. And so with that, you've got these technically savvy people that are out there and understand the need for that security. And that just helps a hell of a lot.
I have to say, in Network Rail, that has been, certainly in the course of the last 18 months to 2 years, has been a real help. So exactly that. So we talk about two-factor authentication, and actually they get it, because in their personal lives they're starting to see this and they understand the ramifications of not doing it. Right. And exactly that. You go back 3 or 4 years when you're having conversations about why security is so important, they couldn't relate to it. One of the early things we did, and it sounds like you've done something very similar, is we dropped the corporate agenda at first. and we talked about security in personal terms. I even invited, I'm a chair of governors at a local primary school, and we borrowed the year 4 from there, and we brought them in, talked to them about digital security, got the staff involved, and it just created an amazing dynamic and conversation. And out the woodwork came lots of conversational gambits and threads of people who are actually starting to worry about this, but they've not made the connection between security in their personal lives and security in their corporate lives. When eventually we catch up and we talk about two-factor authentication and the VPNs and all that, the connection was made, and then you can start to have the conversations about corporate, and that's been really helpful. And using some of the big ticket, high publicity events we've seen in the last 12 months has been a little bit of leverage as well, because people have now, it's the whole show me, tell me thing, so we can sit there saying, oh, you might get a virus, or you might get this, or you might get that. For them to actually see that it's happening at a scale that they've never before perceived, people are going, I get it, I get this now, what do I need to do? And then if they start to say that in the context of my business, then I can work on that, and we build that rapport and we build that culture up, and then you feel a little bit easier about this new technology. And okay, you want to use a HoloLens, well fine, let's think about the pros and cons of doing that, and let's have a sensible conversation. Whereas again, a few years ago it would have been, I'm going to use this HoloLens, but I'm going to make sure that I come in at 6 o'clock in the morning because I don't want the security team to see me with it because I know they'll take it off me. Just taking all of that away has been such a step change.